Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr Jacques Mostert, and I am the Brand Academic Manager of Abbott Schools. As part of my specialization, I look specifically at young people with behavior, emotional and social difficulties. And one of the social difficulties that young people often experience is a lack of resilience. In a previous episode, we spoke about how we could help our young people to become more resilient. And today I want to look again at resilience and look at a few steps that you as a parent or teacher may want to follow in terms of helping your young person become more resilient. One of the things that we said previously is that learning will always take place. But it is what is learned that is the most important aspect of resilience. So I'm pretty sure most of you quite often ask, why is it that my teenager just can't become motivated? The fact is that motivation is inherent in all human beings. We are born with motivation. But by the time adolescence starts setting in, there are a few factors that start working against that natural inherent sense of being motivated to accomplish or develop curiosity or to move forward. One of these is an escape of self-awareness. We know that adolescents want to be part of the group, but they also want to be individuals. Now, this cognitive dissonance, this opposites of understanding yourself, quite often causes a young person to feel unwilling to do things or feel that they don't quite fit in. And this contributes to a lack of motivation. There is another very important aspect of why your teen may not be as motivated as you would expect him or her to be. And that is a certain anxiety towards existentialism. Now, existentialism sounds like a very big word and a philosophy. It isn't really. It is just about an understanding of why I exist. Why am I here? What is my purpose? And anybody that has had a conversation with a 16-year-old will know that within any time of a dinner, they are able to solve all the problems in the world, from climate change to every social ill that you can think of. They just know absolutely everything. And sometimes people joke and say, well, if you know everything, why don't you go out there and just solve these problems? The fact is that these conversations often starts because of a question about existence. And when there's an anxiety about not understanding why I am here, that again leads to a lack of motivation. We often talk about fear when we talk about adolescence, and specifically a fear of the future. One thing we know is that the only certainty is change. Change is inevitable. Change is what makes the world go round. Change is that one thing that we can count on. But in an adolescent, the sense of change that takes place, and sometimes at such a rapid space and at such a rapid way of moving forward, social media, needing to learn how to suddenly work on learning platforms, changes in curriculum, changes in the way we do things in society, especially lately. Those things actually culminate in quite serious fear in a young person. And then finally, an insecurity about meaning and purpose. Again, what am I supposed to do? You know, we quite often ask a 15 or a 16-year-old to make very important decisions about their lives, subject choices. What are you going to study? You need to become a doctor. You must find a sensible career. These are all conversations that our parents had with us. I know you can remember that. But there are also conversations that we have with our young people. And when all of these four aspects combine, it is quite easy to understand that young people tend to become demotivated. So what I want to do now is I want to work on a practical guide in building resilience. So at the heart of resilience, there are three not so easy steps to follow. The first is to set smarter targets, and I'm going to explain what I mean by smarter in the next slide or two. The second is to develop a sense of self-determination. And then finally, to look at the ABCDE of sustainable motivation. So, step one of the not so easy guide. Let me explain to you why I say not so easy. Well, anybody that has worked with a teenager will understand why I say not so easy. Because no matter how many videos we make or how many books we read about adolescence, we know that raising a teenager in any family is not so easy. And that's why I am saying the not so easy steps. So SMARTER is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, and with attainable also incremental, relevant, time-bound, evaluation of progress and reward. And what I want to do now is I want to go through each one of those to explain it to you in such a way that you can maybe understand it in terms of your teenager's everyday life, let's say in the schoolyard or in the classroom. So when we set targets and we set smarter targets, we must be specific. For you to have a conversation with your 17-year-old son and say, "You, young man, have to do much better," that's not specific. Because what does much better actually mean? Especially if your teenager doesn't even know what the things are that they are doing right. How will they know what the areas for improvement are? And that's what I mean by being specific. So for you to say, you need to spend 2 hours a day additionally working on your English literature, that is a bit more specific. But what part of literature? Is it Shakespeare? Are we looking at the novel? Are we looking at poetry? Are we looking at their skill to interpret poetry and write an essay on it? Again, do you see how much deeper we need to dig to be specific? You sitting there and you say, how must I know? I did Shakespeare 20 years ago, and 20 years ago it didn't make sense, so I can't see why it should make sense right now. And this is where meaningful conversations with teachers come into play. So for you as a parent, or any students that are watching right now, to set smarter targets, you have to have smart conversations with your teachers. You have to ask, what is it that my daughter is doing right? And what is it that my daughter can do better? And then drill deeper into that specific question about what is specific. What does specific mean? The second part of the acronym is measurable. Now, it is very important that we know that we are making progress. So if we make progress, we can understand that all the effort that we are putting into something is worth going through. But if I study and I spend hours studying and all I get is feedback that says, yeah, no, you did better. You did better is most certainly not measurable. Now, this is a contentious point because quite often people, and all over the world, we say that we need to get rid of exams, and people say we need to get rid of the grading system in general, and that a central point in testing is not necessary. I want to disagree, because to be able to measure my own progress means that I need to put myself in a situation where I can be measured. And this is why the 7 mark readings, in other words, the 7 reports that you receive when you are at Abbott's College, helps you to measure the incremental progress that you are making. The idea of, let's say, getting 65 for a test and then having to jump to 75 is not reasonable. It's not necessarily attainable. And that brings us to the third part of the acronym. It must be something that your child is able to do. I sat in a meeting where a parent said to the child, I see your teacher set you a target of 65. That is 3 more than you got last time. I don't agree with that. I want you to get an 80. I'm asking myself, is this attainable? What steps will this young person go through to go from a 62 to an 80? If there are not incremental stages through which the learning goes, it makes it nearly impossible to attain. And when we cannot attain something, despite the fact that we have tried over and over and over again, something that I spoke about last time called learned helplessness sets in. And then your smarter targets won't help in any case. The next point that I want to talk about is relevant. Again, this comes down to the conversation that you should be having with the teacher. To put a textbook in front of a young person and say, study. Study what? How do I know what I'm studying is relevant? And how do I know that the skills that I am supposed to develop are transferable into different subjects? How do I know that these chapters that I'm looking at are actually the chapters that are going to be in the assessment? Or if I'm doing a project, how do I know that what I'm looking at in terms of information or what I'm Googling or trying to find on the internet is actually relevant to what the teacher wants? So that is a very important conversation. And more often than not, you will find that in the school-based assessment tasks, in continuous assessment, at the end there is a rubric, and that is the key to it. So if it is in the rubric, it means the teacher is going to be using that rubric to assess the work. And you should not be including work that will not be assessed. And that is how you know that this is relevant. So I'm pretty sure, parents, you didn't know that there is a rubric like that, and actually that your teachers have to provide the rubric before the assessment takes place. This is common practice, and you will find that this is the way that we do things at Abbots College. It is extremely important that we put some form of time limit on ourselves. Now, there are 2 very important reasons why I say this. The first one is that all exams are not necessarily difficult, but they become more challenging and much more rigorous because they have to take place in a specific time. So even though you have all of the knowledge and a pretty good grasp of the skills that are needed to be successful, if you cannot do that in a specific time, it means that you will not achieve what you want. And that brings me to the second point, and that is practice, practice, practice. Usain Bolt, you'll remember him? He didn't just wake up one morning and decide that he's going to become a gold medalist. No. He had to work at it. He had to practice, practice, practice. And that is the advice that I want to give to you as a student and to the parents who have to help your students navigate this journey towards self-actualization, towards self-determination and becoming motivated. You've got to practice, and this practice needs to be time-bound so that you can develop the intellectual, the neurological muscle memory to be able to write the exams and be successful. Then we are looking at evaluation. And here I'm looking at 2 things again. The first is self-evaluation. Your child must be able to go back to the answers that they have given and look and say, ah, wait a minute, this is what I did right. Yes, you heard me. This is what I did right. It brings me back to a previous point that I made, and that is that if I don't know what I am good at, how do I know where I must improve on? And this is where self-evaluation becomes an essential tool in making sure that the targets that I set myself are actually specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and time-bound. It is through the self-evaluation that I am doing. And then finally, and this is where your teenager is going to say, yes, I really like this, and that is reward. Now, rewards are very important because that is how we learn, and that is how we kind of like doing things. It is also one of the neurotransmitters in the brain that plays a very important role in becoming intrinsically motivated. In other words, doing things because I want to do it and not because my mom or my dad told me to do it. So, when we talk about rewards, we have to look at the journey from extrinsic or outside motivation to intrinsic or motivation. That means that I'm doing something because this is who I am and that is why I am doing things. That purpose that we want to develop, the meaningfulness that we want to develop in life. So the first thing that we need to know about rewards is that rewards only work if they are immediate, if the young person can predict that the reward is going to come, that it is certain that the reward is going to be there, and that he or she actually finds the reward valuable. So let's unpack that a little bit. We know that immediate feedback is the best way of feedback to remember. And that's why quite often the gamification of education is so successful, because the young person, your teenager, gets immediate feedback. The second thing is that if you are uncertain whether you are going to get that reward or not, that might feed into you not being so motivated to actually do what you need to do. And if it is completely unpredictable whether you are going to receive a reward or sometimes even a punishment, then that also kind of plays into the sense of learned helplessness. Let's think about it quickly. Your child spends hours working on an essay and reads it to you, and you are very proud of the essay, and she's very proud of the essay, and 2 days later the essay comes back and it is covered in red. The unpredictability of whether you are going to get a good comment or a negative comment from the teacher, especially some of those teachers that are sometimes a little bit unpredictable in their mood, that also contributes to a sense of, why am I doing this? Why is this important? So now that we know what rewards should be, let's see how we can use rewards to move from external motivation, which means it's completely reward-driven motivation, to intrinsic or internal motivation. And the first thing that we need to look there is, how do you make a reward become something that your child does because they want to do it? They often want to reward themselves for doing this. This is called the interjection of incentives or rewards. In other words, your child has now learned that doing something well, facing those barriers, breaking through those barriers, means that I can actually give myself something that I enjoy. And quite often, if they decide to reward themselves through, let's say, the earnings that they have got through mowing the lawn or helping in the kitchen or doing a weekend job, that becomes a much stronger internalizing driver, so that motivation can come from the inside. So that internalization of the reward means that they start to find the recognition of accomplishment rather than the 100 or 200 rand, or if they're a little bit younger, the toy that you want to give them, but the accomplishment, getting something done. And this is where the assessment comes in. Those seven reports that we spoke about at Abbott's, seeing where in Mark Reading 1, report 1, you've moved to Mark Reading 2, Mark Reading 3, and at last, at Mark Reading 4, your 4th report in the year, you have broken through the ceiling of 70. That accomplishment is sometimes much, much worth more than it would be in terms of money. Now, quite often parents try to bribe their children into doing much better. And quite often, some of my friends with teenagers say that they are not beyond bribery and corruption to get their teenager to do their work. Actually, you're not doing the right thing. The internalization of the incentive, the fact that I did this, nobody else did this for me, I achieved this. It's a much, much stronger motivational driver than the 200, 300 or 400 rand that you want to give them if they achieve a certain grade or two. And then we move to intrinsic motivation. And this is where we all want to be. Now, as adults, we know that quite often we don't even function on intrinsic motivation. We work for a salary, and a salary is an external reward. But the reason we sometimes go for that specific promotion or study an extra degree or find an additional form of income is quite often because we want to do this for our families. And that is internalized. That is, I am not doing this just for the money, but I'm doing this so that I can give my child a better education. I'm cutting off on the holidays so that I can send my child to a school where my child is accepted, where my child is mentored, where my child is guided through smarter targets, like we have spoken about a couple of slides ago, where my child is recognized for the progress that he or she is making. And I think that is what makes Abbott so different to most other schools, because these are the things that we build our education on, is setting the smarter targets, helping to guide our young people from external motivation to intrinsic motivation. And that is something that we find is the bedrock of the education that we provide. Now, the second step in building motivation and developing resilience is called self-determination. Now, the meaning of self-determination speaks for itself. It means that I can determine my future. And when Ryan and Decky came up, these are the theorists that came up with the theory of self-determination, when they started talking about self-determination, they said it is important that we must remember 3 things. Autonomy, the ability to make decisions about myself and my future. The second is a sense of relatedness. This is 2 parts to it. First of all, we know that teenagers must feel that they fit in. So that relatedness, the relatedness to the school community, the area where they are, plays an immense role, an absolutely fantastically major role in developing motivation. Because if your child feels out of place in the school where they are right now, they're not going to feel motivated. They won't develop that sense of intrinsic motivation. They won't develop that sense of autonomy and relatedness to the community and the environment. And the second is, and this is a little bit of a warning to parents, they must feel related to the subject area that they are doing part. Now, when at the end of grade 9, we ask our young people to choose subjects, I know that there's a lot of parents out there that have lofty aspirations for their children, because I know you see the potential in your child. And you are right. Your child has that potential. You have ultimately been spending the past 14, 15, 16 years with them, and you have a deeper understanding of what drives your child. But that doesn't mean that the autonomy of deciding what subject the child relates to should be removed to them. Yes, you want your child to become an engineer, and they definitely have the ability to. But does that mean that the child feels a sense of relatedness towards engineering? We can say the same about being a doctor, or maybe becoming a CEO of a company, and all your child wants to do is teach grade 1. And if that sense of relatedness to the subject area isn't there, unfortunately, the chances are that we are going to go back to that old enemy of ours called learned helplessness. That thing that pushes us down because this is not what I want to do, this is not what I feel I am about. And then finally, a belief of competence. And this is here again where I actually want to talk directly to parents. And I want to say, your role in the belief of competence in your child's life is pivotal. So building your child's self-esteem seems like the first thought that comes to mind. And in some way it is true. Your child needs to have a solid self-esteem. But self-esteem can also be a double-edged sword. Your child's belief in competence does not rely on his or her self-esteem. It relies on the honest, open, kind and compassionate feedback that you give your child. Their belief in competence is not about you punishing them because they got a bad grade. Their belief in competence is about the kind, honest and compassionate feedback in a discussion that you give them. And yes, honesty sometimes does mean that you can say that you are disappointed. You must say that to your child because being honest about your own emotions also helps your child to form an understanding of their emotions. So now that we've looked at the not so easy step number 2, which is self-determination, I want to look at the ABCDE of finding meaning and purpose. Now this is a bit of a double helix because, as you will see on the slides, we are looking here at a whole list of words that are quite easy to understand and should be forming part of all of your conversations when you talk to your child around the dinner table, or when you have your discussions when you are out or driving on a holiday. And this is about discussions about the future. The first is aspiration. What is it that you want to become? Break it down a little bit more. What is it that you want to achieve this year? Let's go one step lower. What is it you want to achieve in this term? And even one step lower, what is it that you want to achieve in this subject? Talk about those aspirations on all of those levels. The next is awareness. Asking your child if they are aware of how they feel about their achievement. How do they feel about the situation? How do they feel about the environment? Maybe the school where your child is not the place where they want to be. Maybe a non-traditional educational setting where excellence is a habit, where striving for your best. We've spoken a little bit about beliefs, and you understanding what your child's belief about themselves is actually quite important, because they might have a false belief, a false sense of incompetency that you can dispel and actually show to them. But you did do 3 levels higher than you did in the last time. You spent 2 extra hours, not on your phone, but actually studying. So those belief systems we must look at. The next is behaviours. Now, this is a tricky one because adolescents become very touchy when we start talking to them about their behaviours. And here again, I want to talk about the difference between green time and screen time. Green time definitely means outside, in nature, but it also means being natural, not just being linked to a screen all the time. And trust me, telling your 13-year-old daughter that she needs to put TikTok down, that is not always a conversation that is going to go down easily. But it is a conversation that you have to have. They're positive behaviours, they're good learning behaviours, but also the behaviours that are keeping them away from achievement. The next is the challenges they face. Again, you being aware of your child's challenges. In these range of videos that we are doing, we've already started looking at anxiety. We've started looking at mood difficulties. We will still be looking at behavioral difficulties such as social anxiety or Asperger's syndrome. We're going to be talking about dyslexia, dysgraphia. We're going to be talking about sensory problems that your child may experience. And you must be aware of these challenges. Make your child understand that these are challenges and not impediments. They are not barriers, they are only challenges, and that every challenge can be overcome. But you must also have a very honest and open discussion with your school and the teachers about the challenges facing your child, because only then can we as teachers make sure that we become part of the bridge. Not the bridge of the challenge, but part of the bridge of that challenge. You also need to know what your legal rights are in terms of the challenges that your child faces and how the education system actually helps to equal the playing field. And then we talk about choice, because ultimately it is your child's choice whether they are going to take on these challenges, whether they are going to put in the extra hours, and if they choose not to, you need to have an honest and open and empathetic and compassionate discussion about why are you choosing this? Again, it could be the environment. It could be online bullying. It could be just not fitting into or feeling related to the subject areas or the study areas. There are a variety of things that make teenagers choose why they are just not going to be motivated. Then we are looking at deliverables, and this is very important because this brings us back to your smarter targets. So you've now set your smarter targets, but a deliverable is what it looks like once you have achieved that target. Now, in the 7 mark readings that we give at Abbott's, it's quite easy to set those deliverables, but there might be some other deliverables that you want to set. Getting fit, becoming better at a hobby, maybe becoming more socially involved, maybe wanting to learn how to read a little bit better, and maybe a deliverable about less screen time and being outside a little bit more. So you need to be very specific about these deliverables. And then it is about dedication. Now, I know every time my mother nagged me to go and make my bed means that even today I make my bed whether I have to or not, because I can hear her voice in the background saying, "Jacques, go make your bed." It was not necessarily the most effective way of getting me to be dedicated to making my bed, but it is one of those ways that I managed to form a lifelong habit. And that is what dedication is about. Dedication is about forming those lifelong habits that have meaning, that shows who I am and why I sometimes get frustrated with myself when I don't achieve what I've set out to achieve, and why I can go back and evaluate what I have done. And there you see, it's the next point. I must be able to develop the skill to evaluate my own behavior, my own beliefs, my own challenges, the choices that I have made. Are these the deliverables that I want to achieve? How dedicated am I to achieving these goals? And once I've been able to evaluate that, then it forms something called self-efficacy. In other words, I am doing my homework and I'm doing it well because that is who I am. And that, parents, that is motivation. So I think you can see now that these are definitely not easy steps to follow. And the one thing that I want to tell you is that this is not something that you do at the end of grade 12 thinking that they are now suddenly going to start studying for the prelims and the final exam. This is a 5-year journey. This is something that you start even before grade 8. This is a rite of passage that you, the parent, become part of, an integral part of, to make sure that your child is skilled for life in terms of internalized intrinsic motivation and self-determination. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that we've received. I see there are some very interesting questions. The first one comes from Nomfundo. She lives in Melville, and she says, what type of reward works best when I want to get my son to study for his exams? Now, when I spoke about rewards, I spoke about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. What we must remember about rewards, as targets are incremental, so rewards, external rewards, must also be incremental. If you are going to start by saying to your child, for every 5% you get extra, I'm going to give you 1,000 rand, you're making a mistake. Because once they've achieved that, you now have to up the amount of money. And very soon you realize that you're going to have to buy that car much sooner than you wanted to buy that car. So I suggest smaller rewards in the beginning, and then incrementally, slowly increasing the reward, rather than starting high and then realizing after a while this is not sustainable. I hope that answers your question. The next question, this comes from Sonette, and I see Sonette lives in Centurion. You say I must give my daughter the choice to decide, but if I do this, she will choose to be on TikTok all day long. I know exactly what you're talking about. The thing is that you are not going to give your daughter the choice to decide whether she's going to study or not. You are going to give her the choice of what she's going to do in the breaks between what she studies. You are going to teach her and show her how to set up a study timetable, and she gets the autonomy to decide which subject she wants to work on more, because that she understands she must study more for that. And you give her the choice whether she wants to go outside for an hour after school or start studying immediately and then spend a little bit of time outside. The other choice you are definitely not going to give her is to have her phone in the bedroom. Moms and dads, I've said this before and I'm saying this again. 9 o'clock is the end of the internet. If you want to watch Netflix, that's fine, you can download it on your tablet. The fact is that young people need between 9 and 10 hours of sleep a night, because that is when their brains develop. That is when those memories that are so vitally important for their progress are developing. And if they are going to be on social media at 2 in the morning, and you can check their phones if they keep it with them, they are going to be tired, they are going to be grumpy, and you're going to have arguments in the morning. The next question comes from Ivan. Ivan, you live in Cape Town. I'm not jealous at all. Is it realistic to have my daughter make decisions at such a young age about her future? Ivan, you are not asking your daughter to make a decision about the career she's going to take. As a matter of fact, your daughter is probably going to have to retrain 4 or 5 times in future for 4 or 5 different careers. You are giving her the autonomy to choose the subject she feels a sense of relatedness to, a sense of achievement that can take place, and a deeper curiosity. What you need is to make sure that she gets the highest possible bachelor degree pass. It doesn't have to be in physics, because there are a variety of ways of getting into university and tertiary institutions. You are giving your daughter the choice to do well, to challenge herself in an area where she has a natural proclivity towards. You are not asking her to make a career decision, because those decisions will change. We have a last question, because I see we're running out of time. How do I teach my child to become independent? She becomes very anxious about the smallest of things, and this comes from Chris, all the way from Benoni. Chris, it is talking about their beliefs and talking about how their aspirations, the awareness of what they are good at, their behaviours and their beliefs are, and then empowering her to challenge the things that she finds difficult and then to make the right choices. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and for those of you who are going to be watching later again, please don't stop the questions from coming in. We will definitely be answering them on the stream below, and I hope to see you soon again. Good night.